He didn't fool the FBI. He fooled us. The truth about Frank Abagnale Jr.'s crimes. What if I told you that one of the most famous true crime stories of all time, a story that became a best-selling book, a blockbuster Steven Spielberg movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio, and even a Broadway musical, wasn't actually true? In 2002, millions of people watched Catch Me If You Can and believed they were witnessing the incredible real-life story of Frank Abagnale Jr., a teenage con artist who impersonated a pilot, flew over a million miles for free, worked as a doctor and lawyer, cashed millions in fraudulent checks, and evaded the FBI for 5 years. But there's a problem. While Frank Abagnale was telling the world he was flying around the globe as a charismatic teenage con man, public records show he was actually sitting in a prison cell in Comstock, New York, as inmate number 25367. This is the story of perhaps the greatest con of all, not the crimes Frank Abagnale allegedly committed, but the elaborate fiction he sold to the world for nearly 50 years. And it raises an uncomfortable question. When does exaggeration become fraud? And why did we all believe it? The truth is out there, waiting to be discovered. Like, share, and subscribe and comment if you dare to follow the world's most infamous crimes. To understand how Frank Abagnale became famous, we first need to understand who he actually was versus who he claimed to be. Frank William Abagnale Jr. was born in the Bronx, New York City, on April 27, 1948, to a French mother and an Italian-American father. He spent his early life in Bronxville, New York, and his parents separated when he was 12 and divorced when he was 15 years old. According to Abagnale's own claims, repeated in countless interviews, speeches, his autobiography, and the 2002 film, between the ages of 16 and 21, he lived an extraordinary life of crime. He claimed he successfully impersonated a Pan American Airlines pilot for 2 years, flying over 3 million air miles without ever touching the controls. He said he worked as a chief resident pediatrician at a Georgia hospital for nearly a year despite having no medical training. He allegedly passed the Louisiana State Bar exam and worked as an assistant attorney general. And most impressively, he claimed to have cashed over 17,000 fraudulent checks totaling $2.5 million across 26 countries while the FBI conducted a 5-year manhunt to capture him. It's an incredible story. The only problem? Journalist Alan C. Logan maintains that his investigation found that Abagnale's account of his criminal past is, for the most part, a fabrication. According to author and investigative journalist Alan C. Logan's book, The Greatest Hoax on Earth, Catching Truth, while we can, Abagnale was actually behind bars during many of the years he claimed to be on the run. So what's the truth? Let's examine the verified facts versus the claims. Claim: the teenage pilot who flew millions of miles. Frank Abagnale's most famous claim was that between ages 16 and 18, he successfully impersonated a Pan American Airlines pilot, deadheading on flights, riding as a passenger in the cockpit, and flying over a million miles around the world. The reality: Abagnale obtained a uniform at a Manhattan uniform company on July 7, 1965, and informed local media that he was a graduate of the American Airlines pilot school, but he was arrested for theft of checks in Tuckahoe, New York, days later. Official records show that from July 1965 to December 1968, Abagnale was serving a 3-year sentence at Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York, a secure state prison. He was sentenced to 3 years at Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York, as inmate number 25367, the time frame during which Abagnale claims to have committed his most significant scams. Frank Abagnale did not pose as an airline pilot until after his release from prison in late 1968 and primarily for Trans World Airlines, not Pan Am, and he only impersonated a pilot for a few weeks. Claim: millions in fraudulent checks. Abagnale consistently claimed he cashed over 17,000 bad checks amounting to $2.5 million. The reality: federal court records show that Abagnale was convicted of forging 10 Pan American Airlines checks in 5 states totaling less than $1,500. Not millions. Less than $1,500. Abagnale claims to have cashed more than 17,000 false checks totaling $2.5 million during this period, a highly improbable feat given he was out of prison for only 14 months between ages 16 and 21. Claim: the doctor, the lawyer, the professor. Abagnale claimed he worked as a chief resident pediatrician at a Georgia hospital for nearly a year at age 18. He said he passed the Louisiana bar exam at age 19 and worked for the state's attorney general. He also claimed he taught sociology at Brigham Young University. The reality. Using records from the New York State Archives, author Alan C. Logan demonstrated that Abagnale was in Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York, when he was 18. He couldn't have been working as a pediatrician in Georgia because he was incarcerated in New York. Hospital administrators told journalist Ira Perry that the hospital had no midnight to 8 a.m. shift, nor did the position of regular overnight pediatrician exist at the time. As for the lawyer claim, in 1978, several journalists debunked his claim that he passed the Louisiana bar and worked for Attorney General Jack P. F. Gramillion. Regarding Brigham Young University, a 2006 KSL-TV investigation concluded that despite claiming to be a sociology professor in at least 3 books, 2 solely written by Abagnale himself, it appears Abagnale as a BYU professor is mostly or entirely just another real fake. Claim: a 5-year FBI manhunt. One of the most dramatic elements of Abagnale's story was that the FBI hunted him for 5 years across multiple countries. The reality. The story that there was a 5-year quest of the FBI task force trying to catch Abagnale is simply not true. Logan wrote, "There was no global manhunt. No FBI task force. No 5-year chase. He was in prison." The actual timeline shows something very different. After his release on December 24, 1968, 20-year-old Abagnale disguised himself as a TWA pilot and moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. After less than 2 months there, he was apprehended for vagrancy, theft, forgery, and possession of falsified airline employee identification. Claim: only arrested once. In numerous public appearances, including a 2017 talk at Google, Abagnale maintained he was arrested only once in his life, in France. The reality. Public records show Abagnale was arrested in New York, multiple times, California, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Georgia, and Texas. Let's walk through Frank Abagnale's actual criminal history based on verified public records. Early crimes, 1964 to 1965. Abagnale claims his first victim was his father, who gave him a gasoline credit card and a truck and was ultimately liable for a bill amounting to $3,400 when Abagnale was only 15. In December 1964, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy at age 16 but was discharged after less than 3 months, released on February 18, 1965. Less than 2 weeks after his release, Abagnale was arrested for petty larceny in Mount Vernon on February 26, 1965. The following month, in March 1965, Abagnale identified himself as a Scarsdale, New York, police officer and entered the apartment of a Mount Vernon resident with a toy gun and a paper police badge. In June 1965, the FBI arrested Abagnale in Eureka, California, for car theft after he stole a Ford Mustang from one of his father's neighbors. The prison years, 1965 to 1968. This is the critical period. Abagnale was sentenced to 3 years at Great Meadow Prison in Comstock, New York, for stolen checks, serving from July 26, 1965, to May 1967. After serving 2 years, he was released into the custody of his mother, but he broke the terms of his parole with a stolen car conviction in Boston, Massachusetts, and was returned to Great Meadow for 1 year. He was finally released on December 24, 1968. During these 3.5 years, when Abagnale claims he was living his most dramatic adventures as a pilot, doctor, and lawyer, he was actually incarcerated as inmate number 25367. The Baton Rouge Incident, 1969. After his release on December 24, 1968, 20-year-old Abagnale disguised himself as a TWA pilot and moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where he talked his way into the house of a local music teacher whose daughter was a Delta Airlines stewardess he had met in New York. This is where we meet Paula Parks, one of Abagnale's actual victims. Paula Parks, a young Delta flight attendant, met Abagnale on a flight from New York to Miami in 1969 when he was posing as a TWA pilot. After following her from city to city, he met her family in Baton Rouge, and her parents offered him a place to stay. Court records show that he forged a check in John Parks' name and cashed it, stealing about $150, over $1,000 in today's money. He was convicted in June 1969 and sentenced to 12 years of probation, but he decided to flee to Europe. Arrest in France, 1969. Abagnale was arrested in Montpellier, France, in September 1969 at age 21. He was subsequently extradited to Sweden and served a prison sentence before being deported back to the United States. In November 1970, back in the United States, Abagnale was arrested on counts of check fraud totaling $1,448.60, and in April 1971 he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Abagnale was released on federal parole in 1974. So if Frank Abagnale's criminal career was actually relatively modest, a series of petty frauds and check forgeries that repeatedly landed him in jail, how did he become famous as one of history's greatest con artists? The answer reveals the real con. Since his first national TV appearances in the late 1970s, including To Tell the Truth and The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Abagnale sold a captivating narrative. His appearance on To Tell the Truth in 1977 instantly thrust him into the national spotlight, and the next year he was a guest on The Tonight Show, further enhancing his celebrity. Logan's book details how Abagnale took small bits of publicity and made them grow, one newspaper article at a time, with a stunning total absence of research or fact-checking. The fact that one article recounted his tales was proof enough for the next article to be written, and it quickly became a vicious cycle. In 1980, Abagnale's memoir Catch Me If You Can became a best-selling autobiography. The book cemented the mythology. However, some journalists were skeptical from the beginning. As early as 1978, the Daily Oklahoman reported, Frank Abagnale knows less about white-collared crime than most well-read 15-year-olds, and the San Francisco Chronicle reported, the only problem is that the Boston bank exploit, and many other stories Abagnale relates, simply aren't true. But the skepticism didn't stick. The story was too good. In 2002, Steven Spielberg directed Catch Me If You Can, with Leonardo DiCaprio playing Abagnale and Tom Hanks as the FBI agent pursuing him. The film grossed $352 million worldwide and earned Oscar nominations. Leading up to 2020, author Alan C. Logan conducted an in-depth investigation for a book that focused on the perspective of Abagnale's victims. Logan combined earlier newspaper articles, numerous administrative documents, and public records that had not been the subject of scrutiny by major media outlets. Logan's investigation began with a simple discovery. Logan found a small article from February 14, 1969, where Frank William Abagnale Jr. had been arrested in Baton Rouge for vagrancy, which contradicted Abagnale's claim that he was arrested only once in his life, in France. The breakthrough came through Paula Parks, the Delta flight attendant Abagnale had victimized. Paula Parks' family had maintained letters that Abagnale had written to her parents while he was jailed in Baton Rouge. Abagnale's mother disclosed in one of the letters that for the previous 3 years, he had been in Comstock Prison, New York. When Paula gave Logan the letters, he went to the New York State Archives and confirmed that Frank Williams Abagnale Jr. had indeed been there for 3 years prior, between ages 17 and 20, in prison in Comstock, New York. In 2022, investigative journalist Javier Leiva independently obtained the public records first sourced by Logan and confirmed that Abagnale was in prison between 17 and 20 and then convicted for theft in Baton Rouge in June 1969. Leiva calculated that between 1965 and 1970, Abagnale was only free for a matter of months and that his records show he was in prison most of that time. On June 23, 2022, Leiva confronted Abagnale at the Connect IT Global 2022 conference in Las Vegas with prison and other public records in hand, documenting these events in his podcast series Pretend, The Real Catch Me If You Can. When asked to respond to Logan's book and the evidence it contains, Abagnale stated, "I have not read the book, nor do I think it is worthy of a comment." In 2002, Abagnale admitted on his website that some facts had been over-dramatized or exaggerated, though he was not specific about what was exaggerated or omitted about his life. However, this admission is problematic because Abagnale had been telling these same stories, in precise detail, for decades before the book was even written. The exaggerations weren't added by co-authors or filmmakers. They came from Abagnale himself. Here's what we know for certain from court records. In November 1970, Abagnale was arrested on counts of check fraud totaling $1,448.60, and in April 1971 he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. After serving time in France and Sweden, he was sentenced to 12 years in U.S. federal prison. Abagnale was released on federal parole in 1974. He was arrested but not imprisoned that same year for stealing camera equipment from a Texas summer camp. After his parole, Abagnale was arrested for theft from a children's camp in Friendswood, Texas. In October 1975, Abagnale was hired by Aetna Insurance and was abruptly fired after he allegedly cashed bad personal checks during his employee training. One of Abagnale's most persistent claims is that he worked extensively with the FBI, teaching agents about fraud prevention. The U.S. government allegedly offered to release Abagnale on the condition he work for the FBI for the remainder of his sentence. This is repeated in his official biography and was dramatized in the film. However, the actual evidence is murky. Journalist Ira Perry was unable to find any evidence that Abagnale worked with the FBI, and according to one retired FBI special agent in charge, Abagnale was caught trying to pass personal checks in 1978, several years after he claimed he began working with the FBI. The FBI itself has never officially confirmed Abagnale's claims about working undercover or being a special consultant in the way he describes. They have acknowledged he has given lectures at the FBI Academy, but that's different from the extensive collaboration he describes. Abagnale has claimed that his company has made millions from contracts with the U.S. government. However, in 1991, Frank Abagnale and his wife Kelly filed for bankruptcy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with Abagnale claiming $1.6 million in debts and $308,000 in assets. The story of Frank Abagnale raises profound questions about truth, media, and our relationship with compelling narratives. The financial success. Despite, or perhaps because of, the dubious nature of his claims, Abagnale built a lucrative career. He founded Abagnale and Associates in 1976, a fraud prevention consulting firm. He successfully parlayed his television appearances into a best-selling autobiography. The 2002 film further enhanced his celebrity and earning potential. He became a highly paid speaker, commanding fees between $20,000 and $30,000 per appearance to tell his story at corporate events, universities, and conferences. The victims. What often gets lost in the romanticized version of Abagnale's story is the impact on real people. Abagnale's oft-repeated claim that he pretended to steal only from large corporations and never victimized everyday people was debunked by Logan's research. Paula Parks and her family were real victims. They welcomed a young man into their home, gave him a key, cooked him meals, and he repaid them by forging checks in the father's name. Logan's book directly challenges Abagnale's narrative, exposing his most outrageous claims as not only untruthful but also implausible. The media's role. Logan's book is an excellent depiction of how we have sometimes allowed the media to define what truth is, and what our responsibility is to examine that truth and make sure there are facts available to back it up. The Abagnale story spread virally before viral was even a term. Each retelling added credibility to the next, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where the story became true simply because everyone believed it. Why we believed. There's something deeply appealing about the Abagnale narrative. It's a redemption story, a troubled youth who made mistakes, paid his debt, and then used his insider knowledge to help society. It's the American dream in reverse, a criminal who becomes a hero. The story also taps into a fantasy many people have, that intelligence and charm can outsmart the system. In Abagnale's version, He never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. He was always one step ahead, and eventually, he used his powers for good. It's a great story. It's just not true. In 2002, millions of people watched Catch Me If You Can and walked away entertained by what they believed was a true story. The film ends with a title card stating that Frank Abagnale worked for the FBI for over 30 years and that he and Carl Hanratty, the Tom Hanks character, based loosely on real agents, remained friends. But here's what the movie doesn't tell you. During the years Abagnale claims he was flying around the world, cashing millions in fraudulent checks, and evading a massive FBI manhunt, he was actually sitting in Great Meadow Correctional Facility in Comstock, New York, as inmate number 25367. The real Frank Abagnale wasn't a charming teenager who outsmarted airlines and flew 1,000,000 miles. He only impersonated a pilot for a few weeks after his release from prison in late 1968. He didn't cash $2.5 million in fraudulent checks. Federal court records show he was convicted of forging checks totaling less than $1,500. He didn't work as a doctor or pass the bar exam while the FBI hunted him for 5 years. He was in prison. So what's the real crime here? Frank Abagnale committed check fraud. That's documented and undeniable. But his greatest achievement wasn't the crimes he committed in the 1960s. It was the story he sold in the decades that followed. He created a mythology so compelling that it survived skeptical journalists in the 1970s, became a best-selling book in 1980, and transformed into a beloved film in 2002. He turned modest criminal failures into a $1 million speaking career. He became famous not for what he did, but for what he claimed he did. Science writer Alan Logan says the real grift is Abagnale's entire life story. And that raises an uncomfortable question for all of us. What does it say about our society that we reward good storytelling over truth? That we made a celebrity out of someone whose greatest skill might be exaggeration? That we prefer the compelling lie to the mundane reality? Frank Abagnale didn't fool the FBI for 5 years. But he did fool the world for nearly 50. In the end, maybe that was the perfect crime after all. The teenager who allegedly became one of America's most wanted fugitives before his 18th birthday? He was actually in prison from age 17 to 20. The sophisticated con artist who flew around the world? He was a petty criminal who kept getting caught. But the man who convinced millions of people that a fabricated story was true, that person is real. And he's been cashing checks on that story ever since. Hungry for more true crime? Like, share, subscribe, and check out our other videos on Crime Chronicles. Tell us what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.